how cautious should we be with the US market, bearing in mind that the iGaming revolution in New Jersey wasn't perhaps, as overwhelming as some people predicted? Or should we see this as the biggest opportunity, bearing in mind this could become the biggest legal sports betting market in the world? What's your take on it, Dave?
It's kind of a mixed take of go really, really fast and expect it to be really, really slow. I think, like you just said, this is the potential to be one of the largest sort of regulatory changes in the global market in the decade, I guess, with the exception of some place like China opening up. This is an absolutely massive market. But I think we also have to be cautious that even though everyone's going to be scrambling and I think rushing to get products for New Jersey and Pennsylvania online as quickly as possible, it's still going to take time. It's for these legislative bodies to not only put the laws in place, but also to set up the regulatory bodies to try and understand how to regulate sports betting. And it's going to definitely be a game of patience rather than a market just suddenly appearing overnight. Again, the U.S. market, there are somewhere around 1,000 casinos in the U.S. market between the commercial casinos, some of the tribal casinos, I guess some of the riverboat casinos. And you've obviously got some very different sizes of the states, right? Some very small states, some very large states, which I'm sure we're all going to be cheering for and jumping on and diving after. But I think we're looking at a market which is going to be highly fragmented. You do have maybe 12 to 15 casino groups, which are multi-state casino operators, which are going to, again, be the crown jewels to go after. But there are literally 1,000 casinos in America that all need to have a sports book set up or miss out on the market. And so I think what we're going to see is, from a technology point of view, it's going to be very, very important that you can have sort of the lowest total cost of operation. I think that means how can you very quickly deploy a platform, get that platform situated in the state the most cost-effective way. And I also think it's going to mean that we're going to see a proliferation of self-service betting terminals. And I think the retail technology for some states which might not be able to compete online and market online, they can certainly put a machine in their casino or around their territory, depending on how the states shape up.
What about the regulatory side? Because one of the scenarios pretty much is, let's assume 40 of the 50-odd states decides to regulate. Does that mean we might have 40 different frameworks, 40 different...
You will, yeah, definitely.
Guaranteed?
I just don't see states working together with there will definitely be crossover. I think that there will be some information sharing. We'll try to get best practice. But if you look at the regulatory structure, I guess the legal structure, each state is independent. Each state has their own Congress and their own Senate, and they make their own laws. And it would be a long shot to assume that each state actually implements the same law.
Yeah, I think it's a perfectly fair assumption. It's interesting already that even in some of the enabling legislation, I'm told there hasn't been a lot of dialogue. You can clearly see that, because in some cases it's almost half a dozen pages, in other cases it's 360 pages to get enabling legislation.
I've met with a couple of legislators, once at the ICE show earlier today, another one coincidentally at a Jimmy Buffett concert in Paris.
I'm amazed you admitted that in public, actually, but there you go.
Yeah, he puts on a great show at La Cigale, actually. I'd highly recommend it. But I ran into a state legislator from Kentucky, and they were looking at sports betting. And I think it's fair to say that the state legislators don't understand sports betting. They don't understand gambling. They have a very hard time trying to get their head around it. So there's no way that 50 different state legislators, I guess 100 with the Houses and Senates, are going to actually come together and have the same approach. And it's a different business model. I think for anyone who's not particularly well versed with the history of sports betting or how the industry has been set up and has been run, a lot of the largest operators today run on, I think what Andrew was probably trying to refer to as a legacy platform, maybe. Things that were designed 20 years ago. They're fantastic for taking a lot of bets on a busy Saturday afternoon or for the Grand National. But they're big, large, monolithic platforms that take 18 months to install sometimes. And I think, largely what we're seeing, and, certainly what my company's been trying to do, and I think everybody up here, is to have a different business model, more along the lines of software as a service. How can you set up a sports betting platform, using modern techniques, modular, just a lot more efficient, so that you can launch a sports book and have it be run in the cloud in some instances. I'm sure all the states will require us to have hardware in each casino or whatever. But I think the business model of having a fully managed service or versus having a legacy platform where you had to go through a large installation process and it'd be sort of 18 months and £5 million before you could start taking your bets. I think that's really what we've seen over the last 5 years in the industry, is a complete change of that core business model.
But what's the general view of how current thinking is going about the so-called integrity fee? That seems like a pretty major barrier to me.
I think it is certainly the way it was proposed in Indiana, which was disguised as 1%, just this tiny little 1%, but on a 4 to 5% margin product in the U.S., we all know it's 20 to 25% of the actual gross win. And I think that as that comes out and people start to understand that, they'll recognize that actually you shouldn't have 20 to 25% of the economics just for having it behind your product. I think, Max, you were starting to talk about it's, and you said it a lot more eloquently than I can, I'm sure, but it's going to drive people to the black market. And that's why it's the largest oxymoron I've heard of yet, to be saying that we want 1% or a 20% gross win for integrity fee is just going to drive all of the business into the black market. It may just drive it into the next state, and that would be fine, I guess. There's no way that somebody in Illinois or in Indiana isn't going to have a friend in Illinois and just drive across the border to get their bets placed, but you're not going to be taking any bets in those territories if you've got something like that in place. I think New York is looking at it a little bit more reasonably, in that it's got a big headline number, but it's actually got a cap, which is, I think, something like 2% of gross, which brings it down into the realm of realistic. What I'd like to see is some language where the sports leagues actually give something for that integrity fee, which is access to data and data feeds, and that they're providing a product. And that's what makes a great industry, is if they're supplying something along with that taxation, access to real-time live data, and that's what we'd ultimately like to see.
I totally agree with Dave on that. Perhaps the way they should look is reducing their integrity, if they have to have something, reducing their integrity fee to a much more palatable level, and then deliver data as well. Then it may have a more sophisticated place within our industry that's relevant, I'd say.
They should actually subsidize the tax, because the more money that goes online into the regulated business, the higher the integrity will be, because we'll have more visibility, and it will do exactly what they want to do, is bring it into the light and have transparency. So actually the integrity fee should be negative, don't you think?
Yeah, certainly the likes of the NBA are going to see increased viewing on the back of sports betting legalised across the US. It's going to be fantastic business for these leagues. So they're going to do pretty well out of this without any integrity fees. So, our firm view is that the integrity fees are completely unwarranted. It's unfair to the players, essentially, because the operators will either choose to load the margin onto the players, or they'll still try and compete with the offshore books, like you said, and essentially the revenue still remains outside of the state and the US.
And the sports leagues themselves are also engaging in dialogue at some levels, and we've certainly met with the sports leagues who are asking the questions that they should ask. I think on one hand they're lobbying to try and get a big chunk of cash, but I think they are genuinely trying to understand how the whole ecosystem works at the same time.
Yeah, so I guess within that, the elephant in the room has got to be, of course, we have a huge illegal market there. Nobody really knows how big it is. 150 billion, could be high, could be low, could be about right, who knows. But it's huge, and it's a big elephant. So when you're having those discussions, what do we actually think is going to happen to that? We start to get state-by-state legislation, with or without a good tax rate, with or without a good tax model. You can make some working assumptions. Are all the people who currently bet illegally all suddenly going to stop doing that and adopt the legal model? What happens to the grey market in the US from 2018 onwards? What's your view, Dave?
I think if you look at the American market, we love engagement, and it's going to be all about fan engagement. And I think it's going to be product-led. I think that there's going to be a huge piece of education that goes hand in hand with regulation. Some individual people who are betting. I've got a friend of mine back in Michigan who I called last winter, and I was telling him how exciting it is that we looks like we're poised for sports betting to open up. And he said, "What do you mean?" I was just down at the casino in Detroit, and I placed a bet on the Red Wings. He physically went to a casino in Detroit and placed a sports bet on the Detroit Red Wings, and he thought he was placing a legitimate bet. And I think there's a huge piece of education that has to come with regulation, but I think ultimately there's going to be a fantastic opportunity for operators to put a product in place which is just fantastic. I think the U.S. market obviously has exposure to in-play betting through the Costa Rican sports books, but I just think that by legitimizing it and getting sort of the power of the creative digital agencies in America, we love our sports, we love our statistics, we love our fantasy football. I think the more we can turn it into an engaging product, you'll get people to come in. And it's going to be a transition, but it's going to take education as well.
But what about innovation that you would expect to want to be able to offer? How much of that, what we know about the US consumer, this insatiable demand for information and statistics, is that something which is going to be an absolute essential to have alongside any sports betting product, perhaps different than we're used to in Europe, for example? Any views on that?
Yeah, I think the U.S. market is so diverse and so large that actually I think what we're going to see is some really exciting product development, because I think there will be some situations, some retail operators who actually what they really want is a self-service betting machine, which is almost like buying a train ticket here, except something that actually works. Something where you can walk up, you get your bet down, and you walk away, tied into the loyalty point system of the casino. I think on the other end of the spectrum, we're going to see some amazing apps get developed where you've got runners on first and third, and you can kind of pick up your app, and you've got a graphic, and you click on the bases that somebody's going to get to after the run, whatever. I just think that we're going to see a diversification of the actual products. I think you're going to find that most of the bets are still going to be on the big main markets. I think that I've never been a fan of having 150 different ways of betting on a football game. I think that long tail really destroys the user experience rather than adds to it. And I think once we go into America might be a bit slow at coming around to sports betting, but I think, again, the creative agencies and the ability to sort of gamify products or just make it a much more instant experience, we're going to see things, and they're going to leapfrog what we're doing over here in Europe, as long as you've got the flexibility on the front end to offer those APIs and let them develop unhindered without the sort of the old way of thinking of whatever works in the UK works over there. Can I just add onto that? When I first started the company 10 years ago, it was I was in the gaming industry, and we could see that live data coming from the stadium would get faster, more detailed, more reliable, more legitimate as the sports authority started selling, and that live data would drive pricing models, and we would see a complete automation of 99% of the labor that goes into a sports betting product. And we wanted to learn how to use live data. So I guess this is back in 2008. We came up with the UK industry's first live fantasy football player ratings, and we put those up onto Metro newspaper. And we doubled the number of page impressions on that game by taking live data and presenting it to the end user in a way that was meaningful and relevant for them. And then what we did is we created betting models on who would be man of the match, so who would score the most fantasy points. And we created head-to-head betting markets. And they worked very well as a niche product. As soon as we started trying to put them up onto Sky Bet or onto Coral, they got lost as one of 150 different ways of betting on the product. But I think we'll see some of that type of thing coming back in America. Whenever I go back at Christmas, my brother-in-law has got 3 different fantasy football games that he's on, and he's watching it constantly and looking at the points that are being scored. And I think that's the type of product innovation that will also really try and start differentiating it. And we just don't have anything like that actually works in Europe. But that's a very unique type of product that I think needs to be localized for the U.S. market.
Okay, thanks. Is there any other questions? Because I'm going to wrap this up because I'm being given the signal. If not, before I hand over to Andy to wrap up today's session, please share my appreciation with your panel for the guys. Thanks, fellas, very much. Thank you.